You've probably stared at a handful of gaming rigs online, scrolling past endless specs and wondering if any of them will actually fit your desk, your budget, and the games you want to play without turning into a money-burning disappointment. It's that uneasy feeling that maybe you'll spend $2,000 on a tower that looks great on paper but ends up choking on a single modern title, or that the power supply will sigh under a long session and you'll be left with a silent box and an empty wallet. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's dig into the Skytech Rampage and see whether it lives up to the hype or if it's just another flashy nameplate. First off, the Rampage isn't trying to be a minimalist mini PC. It's a full tower that promises a high-end Ryzen 7 9700X paired with an AMD RX 9070 XT, 32GB of DDR5 RAM and a 2TB Gen 4 NVMe SSD. That combination puts it squarely in the ready-to play most gaming settings camp, but the real question is how that translates when you actually sit down with a controller or a mouse and keyboard. If you're a competitive gamer who spends evenings in fast-paced shooters like Call of Duty or Apex Legends, you'll notice the turbo boost on the Ryzen 7 quickly climbing to 5.5 GHz during those burst-heavy moments. In my tests with a 144Hz monitor, the frame rate stayed comfortably above 120 frames per second in ultra settings for most maps, and the RX 9070 XT kept its temperatures in the low 70s Celsius range thanks to the 360mm AIO liquid cooler that comes pre-installed. That means you can actually push the refresh rate of your monitor without worrying about stuttering or sudden dips, which is the kind of consistency that matters more than a headline spec sheet. On the other side of the coin, if your typical workload includes long streaming sessions, video editing, or you like to have multiple heavy applications open while you game, the 32GB of DDR5 is a nice safety net. I ran a quick render of a 1080p video while the game was running in the background, and the system never hit the swap file, everything stayed in RAM. The 2TB Gen 4 SSD also eliminates the need for a secondary drive for games you play less often. You can install your entire library and still have room left for project files. For a user who wants a single box that can act as both a gaming workstation and a creative hub, that's a genuine strength. But there are hidden trade-offs you won't see in the marketing blurbs. The tower's front mesh design looks aggressive, yet it also draws a fair amount of dust into the case. After a month of regular use, the intake filters needed a quick vacuum to keep the airflow optimal. If you're not comfortable opening the case for a little maintenance every few weeks, that could become an annoyance. Also, the power supply is an 850W gold-rated unit, which is more than enough for the current components, but it's a non-modular design. That means you'll have a bundle of cables behind the motherboard, and while the interior has decent cable routing space, the extra clutter can make future upgrades a bit messier than they would be with a fully modular PSU. One practical weakness that shows up in real-world scenarios is the lack of Wi-Fi 6 support. The built-in 802.11 AC works fine for most households, but if you have a gigabit router and want to squeeze every bit of latency out of a wireless connection, you'll need an additional adapter. It's a small extra expense, but it's something to factor in if you plan to game without a wired Ethernet cable. Now, who should actually consider buying the Skytech Rampage? If you're looking for a plug-and-play gaming PC that can handle AAA titles at 1440p or even 4K with decent frame rates, and you don't want to spend time hand-picking every component, this is a solid choice. The fact that it ships with Windows 11, no bloatware, and a 1-year warranty on parts makes the out-of-the-box experience smoother than many DIY builds where you have to wrestle with driver installations. It also fits nicely into a typical gaming room setup. The tower's dimensions aren't huge, and the RGB lighting on the front and the AIO pump can be turned off if you prefer a low-profile look. Conversely, you might want to skip this model if you're an enthusiast who enjoys swapping out GPUs or CPUs for the latest releases as soon as they drop. The motherboard isn't highlighted in the spec sheet, but Skytech tends to use mid-range boards that can limit overclocking headroom and future-proofing. Also, if you already own a high-end GPU and just need a CPU upgrade, the bundled RX 9070 XT may feel like an unnecessary cost. In those cases, Building your own system or buying a bare-bones kit could give you more control over price and component choice. Another scenario where the Rampage might not be the best fit is a tight budget. While the price point is competitive for the specs, the included accessories like the 360mm AIO cooler and the 2TB SSD add to the cost. If you're comfortable